Okay. Now, YouTube is not working. Let's see why that's the case. Let's see why that's the case. So bear with me here for a second. Okay. That should work. That should work. Okay. Now, let's find back here a little bit. Hold on, I have a add mention here. Okay. 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 So, let's get started, right? Just see what's going on here. All the Discord's away. All right. So, where have we been so far? A little bit of a recap as usual at the beginning. So, we're at the point where we're relatively happy with our general setup. So, let me get that over here. And basically say, okay, so that is our PHP basic on localhost. Oh, okay. If an index route. Yeah. So our home page doesn't work. That is interesting, right? So I guess that this will work just fine. Yes. Okay. So we haven't tested for that in our actual router. What happens if we have no part one, right? It's basically the point. So what we're running into, right? Let's inspect this issue a little bit. Is that in line 16 of the router, so right here, right, that this is not set. And that's of course an issue that we kind of have to figure out, right? So the regular part here is basically to say, okay, what if there is no get route set? So what we can do here is basically just add a if is set get route, then do this, right? And if that's not the case, then basically let's do our default. And our default in that case should be formulated like this. And did we say our default is home? I forgot. What is our default? Is home. Yeah, so we are, and then we're passing in the controller. So we have to be a little bit smart, right? So where do we do this? This is unfortunately something that we kind of have to wonder about whether or not that makes sense. So I guess rather than passing in this one, what could we do here? I don't really want to do this. I don't really want to do this. I actually want to pass this out from the outside, right? Because this is basically HTML skeleton. I want to do this here. Do this here and say home. And here we're going to say default route. Okay, and then here we're basically going to say nope. And this one we will simply never use. And up here we're basically going to say, well, if we don't have a route, then use our default route. Okay, and this will probably simply, oops, why not? And if an index route. This should actually work. Let me see. If is set, then do it. This is a little bit weird. Why is this coming up? Ah, okay, here we go. Yes, and the H is that makes sense. That makes sense, right? It's to be like that. There we go. Okay, so maybe explain this a little bit. From what we do want to do is to basically enable us to say, well, okay, what is our default route if no route is taken? And since we want to reuse this code, I want to basically put this into our router, right? So that's a requirement to say, okay, where do you want to go? What's your default route overall? And this is basically how you do this in the most logical way. Of course, we could have set this in our title homepage here, right? Where we say like, okay, this is basically defaulting to whatever. And I don't know if I want to keep it that way either with this my project. Because as you can see, like right now I have this my project home, and you probably want to influence that eventually, right? So that's a little bit the point that you might wonder about. But what we have is the possibility to influence that. So we have the current route is public, right? So I can basically read that, and the title is also public. So of course, what I can do outside of this is to say, well, I have this title, and I can basically, of course, simply say, so if I were to do this and say, hi, right? In which case, I would basically from the outset influence what I want to show here, right? Not an issue at all. And since I have the current route as something that is public, right? So where is my current route is the new class. So here I basically know what the class is called. And I know that the class itself, so let's say the about, could have something, right, that I can read. So what does that mean? That means that if I were to have a public title, and that is says about me, right, then what I could do from the outside is to say, okay, so that means I can simply read it here, if that's something that I want to do, right? Current route title. And as you can see, whoops, control the home title. Well, home doesn't have that yet. Okay, fair enough. But here you can basically see, okay, I can, and let me actually put this on a little bit of a different mode here so you can see it better. I can basically influence that directly based on that. And then the only requirement I have that is that my controllers would basically have that, right? So something I could basically easily do. So I can overwrite basically everything that's in here. Right now I'm simply going to do the app title and basically use the default. And that's fine, but I just want to show you that if you structure this nicely, then you can influence everything from everywhere, and it will make sense. Now, that said, let's get into the JavaScript side of things, right? So what we basically have now in our router is that the whole shebang works as we want it to. Here we iterate over something on the client side, right? On the server side. So in our, let's close all of this and look at the project itself. So in our home controller, we are using the we iterate over posts find. Do you see that? And in our post controller, we do nothing yet, which is fine, because this is supposed to be an API, right? And we talked about what that means and how that has to look like. So let's try to remember this. So basically, if I have a function let's say post, yeah, in that case, right? So the payload I would receive here, try to remember this. Okay, then here basically I could work with you know, like any kind of database integrations and probably with the models, right? So now I basically want to say, okay, success is model model. Oh, I only have find and post. Okay. Then let's do a static function create post. Yeah, actually that's okay. And in this create post, so what I'm going to do is to say, okay, the ID is db ask, and then I'm going to say, okay, so in post, enter post. And that's all I need to do. Okay, just need this to format correctly. And what this will basically return is the ID of the new post. So I'm directly going to say, hey, return this. Okay. Return this. Oops, that was the wrong button. Which basically means that if I shoot towards this create function, and this is something we could try out in Postman, but we're actually going to do this in the application right now. Then in my in my post model, posts create, and of course this I don't need then. I directly input payload, right? And since I know this in theory could be an issue, I'm going to do the following and say, okay, try post create, right? And then catch, and we could have a DB exception here, in which case we want to return, let's say success false. Should like this for now. Okay. Else, if this actually works, oh, and here we would basically get out our ID. Right. Else we're going to return success true ID. Okay. That's all we need to do. Now let's try it out without a front end, actually, just to make sure. So I'm going to start Postman here. Let's going to start up in a second. Okay. That's our postman. Cool. Localhost login API. No, what we want to try out is to post towards PHP basics. Yep. API post. And let's quickly see what we actually would need here, right? So let's go to the body. So again, we're expecting a post in the right format, so we need the title and the content. Okay, so far so good. Let's go back to our, where's my postman now? Hello, there. So here as form data, I'm not sure if that's going to work, but let's try it out. So here I want to have it as title. I'm going to say new post from API. That's not how you write it. And I want to have a content. Come on. Content. What else can I choose here? File. Ah, interesting. And this is my content. Okay. And let's see. I'm not sure if I can send it in this manner, but we'll figure that out in a second. And go. Okay. See, that's the problem. Uncaught on router line 38. Okay. Let's debug this. Line 38. Current route. Did we send that to the right stuff here? API post. Let's debug it. Let's quickly debug it. And this is actually, it's really time to use the debugger. Okay, anyway, call, and then here I'm basically going to say call. Right, so what I want to do here is I want to var dump my call to see that nicely, and I want to var dump my payload because I think that's the issue. But let's figure it out. And then here I hope that I can somehow make this as a raw response so we can at least, could not beautify, yeah, that's fine. So let's check out what that is doing. Okay, so the first thing is empty. So the payload doesn't work like that. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. And that could already be our issue. So this form data is not going to work for us at all. What we want to have instead is pretending to have a front end, right? So I have a title that is some API title and title. There we go. And then I have content, which is going to be my content. Okay, let's send that one. Okay. So we still get this as empty. We still get this as empty. And you know what the issue with that is? Is related to the input. I think we shouldn't have done it with the with a request. It's probably simply not going to fly. what we really want to do is make some changes to this very, where's the PHP input? Hold on. Only supported to wrap data. Yeah, okay. That makes so much sense. So what we really need to do is to, instead of here the request, we need to make this a little bit smarter, right? So let's say the following. Let's say request is this. And then we say array merge. And we're going to say request. And we're going to say file get contents. And here we're going to have, this is something that I actually kind of need to Google here, but I think it's PHP input. Okay, and that's going to be, and actually I'm going to even simplify this down and say that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. Okay. And then, of course, this is what we're going to do. Okay. So first thing that we're going to do is basically make sure that this is the only thing we're seeing. In our, where's our postman again? Why is this so strange to operate? Oh, there we go. And let's fire this off again. Okay. And by the way, I'm making this specifically hard for us because of the way I'm using Xdebug actually on the server and not using it because I don't want to confuse you guys. Okay, now let's see what the problem is. Array merge expected parameter to be an array. String given. Aha. I guess that makes somewhat sense, right? So the file get contents retrieves a string, and that one will be yes. So I actually need to have this if it exists, though, right? I guess that if I were to simply say JSON decode, let's make this clean. Let's make this clean because that's the API route that will basically always go over here, right? But there can be a request. Yeah. Okay. So this will work now for our scenario, but we will have to look into whether or not that's a smart move in a later step. We'll get to there naturally. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert. So this is of course going to be a JSON file, and we're going to convert this to an array, so we can actually merge it, right? That's basically what we're trying to achieve. And as you can see, this will work for us in this instance. Oops, null given. Okay. Is that the case? Is that the case? Then let's look deeper into it. JSON request. Let's look deeper into it because I might be wrong on this PHP input thing. And then we say var dump JSON request, and then we're going to die. I can't wait until we go into debugging, I tell you that. Okay, now we see it's empty. Huh. It's an empty string. A little bit surprised about that. Why is that the case? Why is that the case? I don't want to use the raw post data. I don't want to do that. I'm probably writing this wrong, right? Why am I not getting this? Let's do a really stupid thing here and say, hey, API post some data. Just wanted to check something out here. This is still empty. Okay. So what we're trying to figure out here is a little bit strange. So this is JSON encoded raw data. And it's simply not reading anything. Okay. I'm gonna actually have to do the following and do a little lookup here. I'm gonna say open project, and what I want is I want to have the actual framework here. It's in the window. Get this out of your way, and look at the base API layer of the Neon 3 framework. How is request method? How are we reading this? Okay, that's all within a No, that actually looks good. This actually looks good. PHP/input. Why are we getting this? What am I missing? Is this something? Has this something to do with my Postman here? Where is it? And 33. That's my JSON request. It's simply empty. It's simply empty. What am I doing wrong? Content type is application JSON. The body is raw. What happens if I do this? Oh yeah, well then I have nothing. Okay, and this is a correctly formed JSON. So the question is, why is it empty? What's happening here? We have to Google it. We will have to Google it. Actually, we can do this one here. Read PHP input. Okay. Yeah, okay, I was kind of... Yeah, I was kind of... that is not really any news, is it? That's not really any news. Something weird. That looks good. That you're funny. I'm doing exactly that. Okay. I need to be more specific. Need to be more specific, I think. And Google it like this. Yeah. If request is redirected. Aha. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That does make perfect sense, right? That does make perfect sense. So how, So we are going through this redirect. And now the question is, but we're sending over the query string right through, right? Let's figure this one out. So our API, where's our postman? What do we get back? API/post. This solves the problem then, right? Ha. Ha ha ha. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. That's how it's supposed to work then, I guess. Okay, well, that's kind of an interesting detour. Let me quickly see at the chat if I confused someone. No, everybody's still with me. By everybody, I mean this one person watching. So what do we have here? So we have a payload. Let's clean this up again. So now we know this works. Now we know this works. So we should be, let's cross-test this quickly. We should be now getting actually to this point here where we dissect whether or not how we put it together works, right? And yes, that's still the case. Fair enough. Fair enough. Then let's go on and make the actual call. And let's see what we get back here. Bam. Cool. So as you can see, we now received, and this is probably interesting that it looks like this. Actually makes me a little bit nervous that this is not beautified. Let's see what kind of headers we get back. Application JSON, that actually looks good. Because So I have to click the pretty one. Okay. Got it. Okay. So, which basically means, okay, so now we have an ID2, we have a second post. So that works. Sorry for that little detour here, but we figured that one out. So here, if I reload this, I should have now 2. Okay, so far so good. So far so good. So that's all the stuff we can do here for now. There will be a little bit of things we need to tackle when we send an empty. So we will have to debug here again, but that's okay. For now, I want to ignore that and say, let's move on to a more logical step. So in my, no, that's fine. In my post controller, you probably noticed that I did not extend or implement anything here. And the reason for that is because we have not talked about, like, if I were to say, hey, do the controller, then the well, no, then if view exists, actually we can't do that. That we didn't specify that it needs to be set in any way. So that's fine. We can basically stick to our pattern just to be consistent. So now we have this controller, and what we are going to do is to get this out to the front end and basically integrate the front end accordingly. What does that mean? It means that we have to talk about what we see. Where do we even have that? Here in the click me, right? Now, where do we want to do this? Let's do this in home. Why not? Let's do it in home. So in our home PHP, in our home view, we kind of want to create a new post, right? Newest posts. And then below here, I'm going to basically simply say, okay, and this should probably also be a 2 things here. Let's say create new post. Okay. Now, there's not too much I need to do here. I'm going to have a simple form with actually nothing. With an ID of post form. And here I'm going to have a very simple input that's a type text and with an, actually then that's all I need, with a name of title and then let's make this actually super simple and say title. We're going to look into stuff later. So what I kind of want to do, which it's a label, is quickly check what did we use here, Spectre. Let's check it. Look at this Spectre CSS, this guy, and let's see what that's doing and say, hey, what is our probably there's forms here, right? Yeah, how's that supposed to look like? Yes, and that looks kind of okay, so let's just kind of steal that right off the bat. And jump back here and say, okay, this is basically how it's going to look like, and this is going to be title, and input example 1 is going to be renamed to title, and same here, title, and then placeholder would be post title. Okay, and then get rid of this instead and say, all right, one more of those guys, and that is going to be my content, and this is going to be content, and this is going to be content as well, and here I'm going to say post content. Now I should probably make this a text area here, right? Yeah, let's do that. Thought so. There's really nothing to it. No class form input. Okay, nothing I need to worry about. The only thing that I'm going to do is to say text area, and I'm going to get rid of the placeholder text here and close this. Okay, and then we say button, and this is btn, I don't know, let's call this secondary. That should be it. Submit. Okay. The only thing that we really want to do here is that to set this as a type submit. Okay. So note what happens now, and this is basically what you normally do, right? When you say, hey, in the way you probably looked at or started learning PHP, you would now actually really post this and then process it on the back end and then re-render this page. Now we're going to do this a little bit differently. So what we are going to do is to think about, okay, how should this work nicely? And here's the basic idea, okay? So right now our post simply returns an ID. And the question is, well, is this really sufficient, or don't we simply want to return the complete entry? And that would make sense, right? So why don't we simply say, okay, so this is post ID, right? Actually, no, let's not even do that. Let's not make that decision here. We're simply going to do that. But when we go to the return and say, okay, so this is the ID, why don't we say, okay, no problem, the payload ID equals ID, and here we say, hey, your new post now has an ID that we're going to give you. Okay, so what that means is, if I look at the postman, wherever that is, then what I can do is to say, okay, where's my body? Here. So a new post, and then I say new content. Okay, and I get that over, and as you can see, in my post I now have the complete title and content. So far so good. And which basically means what we can do in our front end is, I should put that over here. What we can do in our front end is to say, okay, so if we actually create a new post, then we can just append that right here, right, to those cards. Now, those cards iterate, and you see they're like completely like not in a container, right? So let's create this container for us, which we can call post container. And actually, you know what? Just to simplify things, I'm actually going to make this an ID, because we're going to start with vanilla JavaScript for now. And then we basically say, okay, so far so good. Let's make sure that we have yeah, and then we basically get this on there. So let's write our script. So this is ultimately something that we probably want to live somewhere else, right, as a script tag. And you know what? We are going to do that. We are going to do that. This is going to live in slash assets. No, it's not slash assets. What do we call the where does it come in here? Content. Oh, we don't do that anymore. The generate route. We don't give the web root in anymore. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's talk about that later. Where's our home? So we are going to say our source is assets, call it new post. Let's make this clean and say JS new post. So the reason why I'm a little bit wondering like how to do this is because none of this will basically stay set in stone, because we will notice that that is also a little bit of a weird way of doing it. But let's go for that now and say, okay, so apparently we have a JS folder in here, and in this JS folder apparently we have a new JavaScript file that we're going to call new post. Okay, and let's add this to Git for now. Okay, and this is called assets. So the first thing that I kind of want to do is I want to see if that pathing works for me. So if I go right here and kind of, ooh, what is spinning here? Okay, let's see. Yeah. Oh, the style CSS didn't work either because that has a base. Yeah, okay. So let's fix this problem actually. Let's fix this problem and say, hey, there's a base, and this base is of course our get env app web root. Okay. And I mean, we could have also basically said, hey, use the generate route, but it doesn't make a difference here, right? That should be fine. And now let's see if that looks better. That does look better. And now we basically also have the, where are we here? Where's our new post.js in here? So we could make that a little bit nicer here and say, hey, just to be sure that this is always nice, let's do it like that. Oh, ironically that ruined it, because we don't hand that through. Okay, let's ignore that for now, because that's not where it's going to live anyway ultimately. Okay, so far so good. Now in our home HTML, what we probably want to do is getting in the listening to basically when this form is posted, right? That's the first thing that we want to do. So let's jump into JavaScript and say, okay, so this is called post form, and my script will load after that. So that will exist in the DOM, right? So the only thing I'm going to write is to say document dot get element by ID and put this in, and let's say, okay, that's my form. Okay, so far so good. And then what? Well, what we want to do is we want to add an event listener, and the way that works is we first of all say, okay, what kind of event? In that case, we're listening to the submit event, and then we basically have our event with us. So the first thing that we probably want to do is to say, hey, how does this event look like? Right? Let's look at that maybe. How does this event look like? And if we actually execute this, then what we will find is to say, okay, should we fill this out? Sure. This will actually, ironically, I need to stop that first. The first thing that I quickly need to do is I have to say event prevent default, because I actually don't want any kind of reloading to happen. Let's do it again. Submit. Oh, still did it. Okay. So this is basically the event that we get, right? And then you can basically see, okay, so this target here contains the post form itself. Do you see that? And we can also say, oh, look at that. it seems to have a couple of children here, right? So what are those children? Well, those children are inputs and text areas, right? And here I have my child node list where I can basically see that in a little bit of a better form here. But that would basically be more of the, how should I say it? Not too interesting. The form iteration is actually more interesting to say like, okay, those are actual form active elements and they're nicely sorted for me. So does that mean that I can simply like iterate over that? Let's figure that out, right? So what if I say, okay, console log event.target, actually not even that. Let's do event.target.forEach and say form element. And you can see that my IDE already warns us about this, right? Do you see that? But in theory, let's try it out to see what the error is that we're getting, just to understand what's happening here. So let's reload this, fill in something. So that's not a function. So why is that not a function? We just saw that it looks like something. But the point is, like, not every list in JavaScript is actually something that we can iterate over naturally. Because what this actually is, right, if I say, okay, let's actually log the event target. And basically see what we get here. Oh, that's of course the element. Let's do it like that. And that's also an object. Okay. The form elements is basically something that does not have the prototype for each. So how do we kind of get through this issue, right? And the answer is, well, so there are a couple possibilities. We could make an array from, so we could do this in the ECMAScript way. Actually, that is a good question. Is it what's recommended nowadays? Let's check it out. Iterate over form elements. Okay. This is probably an older way. This is probably an older way. Yeah. This is probably what you want to look at, right? That's basically what's probably the easiest form, right? To say like, well, I mean, can't we just use the form elements? Now the question is, what is in the form elements? Is that going to be because if you remember how it looks like, is that going to be our divs, right? Or is it just going to be the actual form elements? And I mean, we kind of already dissolved this question because we noticed that, okay, apparently it seems to target specifically the form elements. But let's try it out and say, okay, so that would mean event target dot elements exists, right? And as you can see, my IDE already warns me, like, well, you're probably wrong with that. Let's try it out. And what do we get? Length 3. You can see that. And then here, even more interesting. So apparently dot title exists. That content exists. Do you see that? Let's try that out if that works. I mean, we want to do that programmatically, but just exploring the madness of JavaScript a little bit. As you can see, yep, that's the element. You can directly talk to it like this. So pretty cool. But again, we don't care what the form looks like, because later on we will figure out, well, maybe we can abstract this a little bit better. So let's say, okay, let's do that. Oops, sorry. So using the spread operator, let's do the event target elements and say, okay, so this must exist now. Let's actually call this form element. Yep. And then what? What do we want to achieve? So we basically want to say, well, that should be our input. And actually, looking at the time, I need to make a break in 4 minutes. So let's quickly get to the point where we can actually send a form. So let's say here I have, and this needs to be a let because I need this to be mutable. And I'm going to call it, I'm going to call this post. I'm going to call this object. I'm going to call this payload. All right, finally decided. So for each form element, I basically want to say, okay, so the payload, and what is it? Do you remember how to get the name? I don't. Oh, we forgot that. Wonderful, wonderful. So we want this to get this by name. We didn't give this names, did we? We didn't give this names. We gave it IDs, so that should kind of work. Does this work without names? I'm not even sure about that. Let me quickly say something. Check that out. Form element name. I don't think that works. I don't think that works, to be honest with you. I'm just super curious myself right now. It says 3. This is super interesting, right? Not really what we want. What we want is, in that case, then the ID, which we also don't want. We want to actually give this a name, but it works at least. Okay, so we're going to leave this as name and basically say no. Let's make sure those have names. I have to be a little bit more conformant here. Actually, we don't need the ID here. That's something that we really don't want. And then we see, okay, that should now basically give us the right thing here. Yeah. Cool. Now, as you can see, I always get this empty line. What is this empty line? Well, this empty line is, of course, the button, right? This submit button, which we really don't want. We really don't want that. So how do we make sure that that is the right kind of element, right? That's basically something that we want to kind of ensure. And if you remember correctly, and unfortunately I have to hop off, so we have to do that the next time. So I'm going to take a short break, and we'll continue right where we were after about 2 hours, I guess.